Hi all, Lee here. So if you remember from last video, I gave you a quick introduction to some of the components I've bought, some of the wood. What I got down to is I routed the truss rod hole. So all I've done since then is I've made sure this surface is flat. I've drawn all of my lines on this piece of rosewood fretboard. So I'm just trying to work out in what order I want to do things, but I think I'm actually ready now. I'm just going to glue this fretboard on. All of my lines are drawn, everything's set up correctly. I've also drawn on my headstock with my headstock template. I've been using the same shape headstock for a couple of guitars now. It's only very basic, but it's good enough for me. So the next step is just to make sure my lines are correct. I've done some measurements. Just as a tip, when you have your center line and you want to draw out the width of the nut and the width of the heel, I always use a compass. So you put the compass right on the center line, put it to the half the measurement you actually need, and then I use a compass just to mark the nut position and the heel position, so then you know that your dimensions are an exact mirror image. Don't try and use the ruler across there, or at least I don't find it to be accurate enough for me. I find using the compass always make sure that it's a perfect symmetry on any of my lines and geometry that I'm drawing on. I've also marked out the width of the headstock. So my heel, I think a traditional Fender heel is 19 millimeters off the top of my head. So I've done mine 20. It doesn't really matter how thick my heel is, within reason, within a few millimeters, because obviously I can route the guitar to match whatever my heel dimensions are, and to make sure I don't have too much height on the fretboard in comparison to the bridge piece. So I also need to cut out the headstock later. So the headstock I think is 13 millimeters, so I've kept that roughly equivalent to the Fender specification, because obviously a lot of your machine heads come pre-made for that specification. So my Spurzl machine heads I've got, they're made for a Fender guitar, so I've kept the headstock to be 13 millimeters thick, as you can see here. But the first job I'm going to do now is glue that fretboard on, and we're going to leave that. We'll come back to that later once it's dry, and then I'll start using the bandsaw and cutting out the shape of the neck. So I've got my tools for the job here. Just some black tape that I put down the truss rod, just so you don't get loads of glue inside the truss rod gap. A glue spreader, just an old piece of off-cut wood that I've got laying around, and of course the wood glue. Now I've already prepped the surfaces, so these surfaces are perfectly smooth and flat. They're not so smooth that the glue's not going to work, but I've just made sure they've been sanded correctly, just so the two surfaces meet correctly. So first job then is if I just get my tape, I put my tape along here. So all that's for is it just stops all of the glue seeping into the gap. What I'll probably do though is once I've put a layer of glue on, I'll rip the tape off when I put the actual fretboard on top. So the next job then is let's get some glue on. I just want to make sure it's well covered, but I don't want it drenched. But I think I still need a little bit more on this edge here. The way I do it is I lightly drag sort of my scraper so it actually floats above the surface and just pushes the glue, so it's a nice even coverage without cutting in and touching the wood. And I think that looks to be okay. Excellent, that seems on quite well. So I'm just going to clamp off the bottom. Just making sure I'm keeping that centre line perfectly accurate. It seems pretty good. Let's just get the rest of the clamps on. Right, so this looks good now. I'm just going to leave this and we'll come back to it later once it's dried. And then we'll start cutting out the neck shape on the bandsaw. And then there's going to be a lot of sanding after that. So, see you shortly. I've now glued the fretboard on. It's all looking very good. So after gluing this on, I was going to start the bandsaw and start cutting this neck to shape. But I've decided before I do that, since I've got a nice straight edge here, I would actually draw the frets, the fret markers onto the fretboard first. So I printed myself out like a fret scale for 648 millimeters, 25.5 inch. And I've just been going through with my right angle, putting the lines where the frets should go. The reason I wanted to do that first is because I know this centre line is completely parallel to the edge of the maple neck. So it made it a lot easier to get my perfectly straight lines. Obviously, if I'd have cut this out first, the neck actually is thinner, obviously, at the headstock. So that means it's going to be a lot harder to get those parallel lines without setting up some sort of jig. So I thought, since I've got this lovely flat parallel line, I'd use my right angle, get the calculations and just draw the frets in. So the frets are now in. The lines for the frets are now in, as you can see. One other thing I wanted to point out, I've been drawing more lines on here, just so we can see exactly what I need to cut. So hopefully you'll be able to see this. But obviously I've got the headstock shape I want on there. I've been drawing some dimensions on the side of this. So the size of the heel and then also where the neck slightly comes in. When I do the bandsaw pass, I want to see if I can just take a very straight heel section, but then I want to be able to curve in a little bit to start the neck profile. So like I say, I'm trying to gauge it roughly around the fender specification, and the neck on a fender is about 3 millimeters or 3 to 4 millimeters in from the bottom of the heel and the headstock. So I've just drawn these markers in. Everything is now ready. So the next step is to get this on the bandsaw and carefully start cutting the lines. There's one other thing I need to think about, and it's what and where do I cut first, because obviously I want that straight edge of the maple to be able to cut long way, so I'll probably do that first, and then I'll be able to put it down flat and cut the neck shape out. So hopefully that's the way I'm going to do it. I think the very first thing I'm going to do is actually the headstock. So just for the practice and getting the bandsaw working, I'm going to cut the headstock first. Now obviously on the headstock, I need to lower the headstock. It's going to be a straight headstock like a fender, but it's a few millimeters lower than the top of the neck. And obviously that's where the strings go over the nut and go down slightly. So let's get the bandsaw going and start cutting this neck out. So my very first cut is going to be the top of the headstock. This is the first line here. I don't want to go all the way up to the nut because I want to leave it a section to like curve it out slightly to make it look nice. So I'll go down to there, but that's my first cut, so let's get going. So that's the first cut, perfect. So the next thing to do now is to move on and start cutting the neck profile out. And there we have it. The basic neck is taking shape. I've kept within just outside the line on the whole neck, so there shouldn't be any mistakes. I should be able to level all of that up to the perfect dimensions. So the next thing to do is to get the sander on and we'll start sanding. So here we go then. This is going to be the noisy, messy part. I've still got my lines. I've redrawn my heel joint, redrawn the lines. You have to be so careful with this big sander because it can easily go wrong and you can go too far. But I just want to start with this to make it a lot easier. So when I go to the hand sanding, it should be a little easier. So let's get the glasses and the mask on and we'll start this process. So as you can see here, it's coming along nicely. One edge is almost perfect. The other edge still has a few dimples, so I've got to sand that down because the blade of the bandsaw just took some slightly deeper chunks out there, so I've just got to carry on with this side. I've not even started shaping it yet, but I just want to make sure the neck is perfectly straight and level and to the dimensions I need. So that's roughly 56 millimeters at the heel and 43 millimeters at the neck. So I'll just carry on with that and get that done, and hopefully we can then start the shaping. So hopefully you can see we're slowly getting there, just rounding it off up to the center line, going up to the fretboard itself. So it's all looking good. So I'll just keep cracking on with this and hopefully it should look good. So this is looking really good now. Hopefully you can see, I can already start to see the flame come through. It's nice and smooth. I'm getting that nice curve on there. I'm probably going to stop using the machine now because it's getting a bit too delicate. So I'm going to get onto the Dremel and the hand, just hand sanding. to finish this off. But I'm really pleased with that so far. Let's rub off a bit of this dust. So hopefully you can see that. All looking good so far, coming together nicely. So let's get on to the hand sanding. Excellent. That is it for now. I'm really pleased with how this is looking. That flame is really popping out. I've got rid of most of the blemishes. This isn't the final finish. Obviously, I've still got a lot of work to do on the fretboard yet. So what I'll do next, next video actually, I'll end this video here, post this one. But the next video, I'll start radiusing the fretboard and putting the frets in. So next video is going to be to try, if I can, finish off fretting, radiusing, and getting the machine heads in, and that should be the neck pretty much complete. So I'll see you next video.